Welcome to this episode of Insights with Ovations. I am your host, Aaron Ellis. You can find everything about me at aaronellisofficial.com, as well as that is my social media handles. I am joined today by Frank King. Now, Frank is a world record holder with 12 TEDx Talks. We agreed neither one of us has seen anybody with more than that. And he's been speaking and doing comedy full-time for 38 years. He blends his experience in mental health and comedy to deliver engaging, transformative keynotes and workshops, helping associations embrace the challenging yet crucial topic of suicide prevention. Frank, welcome today.
Thank you, Aaron, and good job on transformation, by the way.
Yeah,
exactly. Are they going to edit that out now? Because it means nothing.
Yeah, we can even edit the fact that we're saying we're going to edit it.
That's true.
And sometimes I don't. The interesting thing is sometimes I don't, because I'm big on authenticity. I'm big on being able to show up however I show up and showing people that that's okay, right? And honestly, I didn't know that's where I was going to start, but I think that's a really relevant thing when it comes to what you speak on. Mm-hmm. And I would love to hear whatever arises in you. I'm big on blending the personal and the professional. So if there's a story here in your personal life that led to what you're doing today, I assume there is. You're laughing.
Yeah,
I would love to start there and just see where that goes.
Okay. No, yeah, it depends on how much time you have. It's I speak on suicide prevention for a variety of reasons, but one is that depression and suicide run in my family. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days.
Wow.
And if you're already hardwired, and it's called generational depression and suicide, if you're already hardwired for depression and suicide, and you're that close to a suicide, and I don't think anybody could have gotten any closer than I did at age 4, then the chances of you taking your life, or at least seriously considering it, later in life goes up. And that's what happened in 2010 at the height of the recession, after filing a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and losing everything my wife and I had worked for 25 years. I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like, literally. Now, I say to the audience, spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. Gets a nervous laugh, and I go, no, it's okay to laugh. And then I tell them the story of a friend of mine who came up recently and said, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey, man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? That's where the funny is in suicide prevention. It's not jokes. It's just funny personal anecdotes. So that's how I did stand-up starting in 85. I went on the road with my lovely wife, and then my girlfriend, now my wife for 37 years, for 2,629 nights in a row nonstop.
Wow.
No home, just club to club to club to club to club. Worked with Seinfeld, Dennis Miller, Foxworthy, Ron White, Ellen, Rosie. Opened up for Randy Travis, the Beach Boys, Neil Sedaka, Mary Wilson. And then in 93, I got a job in radio in my old hometown, Raleigh, North Carolina, at the #1 morning show. And I took a #1 morning show in 18 months and drove it to #6. And a friend of mine said, you didn't drive it in the ground. You drove that sumbitch into Middle Earth, which I did. And then when I got ready to go back on the road, it was gone. Clubs are closing faster than opening in 95. So I thought, a comedy's clean. I'll be a corporate comic. And I have friends who ask me, what's the difference between a club comedian and a corporate comedian? And my answer at the time was $5,000 a day plus travel.
Of course.
Yeah. And they accused me of selling out. You sold out. Yes, I'm a prostitute, but I'm a high-priced prostitute. And then I rode that horse until 2007, the end of 2007. Made a couple $100,000 in 2007 just telling jokes. And, of course, 2008, the bottom dropped out of the housing market. You know the drill. And then by 2010, I'd run out all my credit lines, and that's when I came close to taking my life. And by 2012, when meetings began to come back strong, meeting planner said to me, Frank, we love you, but we can't pay you $5,000 anymore just to be funny. You've got to teach the audience something. I'm like, what? So I have a friend named Judy Carter who wrote, among other books, The Message of You, Turn Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. She said, Frank, look, I'll send you a copy. Read it. You'll figure it out. I went into it thinking I got nothing. Halfway through, I thought, oh, my Lord, I do have something to talk about. Given my, my family history, more nuts in my family, Aaron, than in a squirrel turd. My near suicide, and I live with 2 mental illnesses, major depressive disorder, relatively common, and chronic suicidal ideation, which is relatively rare. I know therapists who have no idea what that is. When I say that out loud to a therapist, they stare at me like a pig at a wristwatch. Those two. So I thought if I got some training, certification, I could keynote on suicide prevention. So I have several certifications. And my second hurdle, Aaron, I've been a comic for 2.5 decades. Who's going to believe I can do anything funny? So my wife famously said, well, do a TEDx. And I said, what's a TEDx? Mm-hmm. And just by chance, I got an app that week in my email from one up in British Columbia, Vancouver. I filled it out. I got an audition. I went up and I told the story of my mother and I finding my great aunt had died by suicide when I was 4 years old. And I knew, and I flew up to do it. I didn't want to do it on Zoom. I wanted to do it in person, see what the impact was like. And I mean, they were slack-jawed. I mean, it's horror movie horrible. I mean, I just screamed for days. So I got the TED, and then 2 other TEDx events saw that one and contacted me and said, do you have any more mental health topics? Yeah. So that was 1, 2, and 3. Number 4, inspired by people in the entertainment business mostly, was mental with benefits, the evolutionary advantages of mental illness. I kept bumping into people who had a mental challenge with some other amazing ability, comedians, magicians, singers, writers. Mm-hmm. I thought this cannot be a coincidence. So that convinced all the meeting planners and speakers bureaus that yes, Frank could do something funny with humor. In my first TEDx talk, I took the audience a bit by surprise. They weren't expecting the humor. Right. I said, when I was researching this, I went to TED.com to see how other people handle the topic of suicide. I figured it'd be a couple of dozen talks. There were 3, just 3. And then I said to the audience, and then it hit me, well, duh. If you're really good at suicide, you're not going to be recording a TEDx talk. At which point they realized, this is going to be a little different. Yeah. Anyway, that's my journey from stand-up comedian in San Diego, La Jolla, California, at the Comedy Store as an open micer. By the way, I knew from 4th grade when I told a joke, the kids laughed, teacher was hysterical, that I was going to be a comic. I got on stage for my first 5 minutes in La Jolla, and halfway through my little set, I heard a voice, "You're home." Mm-hmm. Well, then a month and a half later, we went on the road. I'm sorry, a year and a half on the road.
Wow. So I love that the way you told your story. And I love that you're bridging the comedy into mental health, especially into suicide. I mean, that's like mental health has been a subject that a lot of people don't want to tackle anyway. Yeah. And we're trying to figure out how to tackle it in a way that's more effective and that people will open up rather than close when they bring up the topics. And here you come and make it humorous. I mean, that's amazing. I honestly don't know I don't have a word to say how effective I'm assuming that can be. Honestly, I don't think I've ever smiled so much listening to somebody talk about suicide. Right?
And here's the thing. There's a psychological principle involved. I wasn't aware of it when I started, but if you are speaking and you have some serious business to share with someone, and it's deadly serious, mm-hmm. and then if you give them a little comic relief, their brain is much better prepared for the next piece of serious business. I just did one in Ohio, a construction conference, 800 people. And a woman came up afterwards and said, Frank, I heard essentially the same, suicide prevention in construction talk last year in Florida, but the guy was just death, dying, morbidity, mortality. After an hour, everybody's just kind of hanging their heads. Mm. And she goes, it was really refreshing to organic, well-placed, tasteful anecdotes, just to lighten. Plus, it also helps to break the stigma. People have an idea in their mind what mental illness looks and sounds like, and it's not me.
Right. I want to actually touch on that because something came to mind right before you just said that people have an idea what it looks like. I know when I've gone into organizations and I've spoken on mental health and I brought up the topic of suicide, a lot of times the feedback either before or after is that it almost triggers this thought that, oh yeah, due to PTSD in veterans. Like a lot of people go there.
Yeah.
Yes, I know you know this, but I know that it's prevalent everywhere. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to necessarily be a veteran, right?
No.
These suicidal thoughts. So what have you found are the top industries, like as far as where this is a problem, like where is it most prevalent?
Well, and off there we talked about how I selected top 6 at-risk occupations in the U.S. to do my marketing. I'm a big believer in speaking. You pick a lane and you become a thought leader expert.
Yeah.
You know, you're no longer a commodity in the speaking business. And then you select 3 to 6 ideal clients. The first one was easy. Construction. Roughly 1,000 people die every year in construction by accident. Roughly 5,000 die by suicide.
Really?
You're 5 times more likely to jump off the building than fall off. They have a really serious problem.
Wow.
Which, as a speaker, and I wish as speakers bureaus that, you know, when people come looking for a suicide prevention speaker and they contact me, I don't have to convince them it's a good idea. They got that. They just want to figure out which one they're going to use, which makes the sale process about 50% over. If they contact me, they've gone online, they found me on page 1 Google in their industry, and they just want, I guess, chat to make sure I am who I say I am. And it's the thing I did, it was in Columbus, Ohio last week. I had done a conference in Cincinnati for a big construction association, and $7,500 plus travel. And then I got 2 speeches, keynotes from the audience that day. And I actually went to their construction sites. Each one had several construction sites. I did several keynotes each day. And then on January 28th, these guys in Columbus decided that on February 28th, they wanted a suicide prevention speaker. So somebody goes, well, who? And somebody who'd been at that conference said, the mental health comedian, Frank King. Yes. That's what you're after as a speaker, I think, is when that subject comes up, you're top of mind. You're known about before you're needed.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, first time ever, Aaron, I had the testicular fortitude, because a friend of mine's been after me to do this for years. He said, what do you charge? I said, it's $12,500 inclusive. Really? What's that include? Well, I'll do a keynote, I'll do a breakout, and I'll do one of 3 things. I'll MC the entire day, I'll do 45 minutes of stand up at your banquet, or I'll auctioneer at your fundraiser for $12,500. And he said, well, you know, the itinerary is pretty much set, so we'll just have to pay you $7,500 for the keynote. Okay. So that's why I suggested to my clients you have an all-inclusive package. You give them this big fat number first. Maybe somebody someday will buy that, but it makes that 75 look really good.
Yeah. So other than the construction industry, what other industries you find this is an issue?
Dentists were my first.
Dentists.
And if you type in suicide prevention speakers, dental, suicide prevention speakers, plural, dental, you'll find I have at least a half a dozen organic listings on page 1 on Google. Huh. I mean, that's enough to give a 24-year-old social media manager a Woody. And so it's dentists. And you know who else has a very similar business model? Veterinarians and physicians.
Right.
What they have in common is nowadays these 3 professions usually come out of school with $500,000 in student loan debt. And in those professions, suicide is not the big killer. It's stress. Stress induced or exacerbated mental or physical ailments, and it begins with financial stress.
Right.
That's what they have in common. And Aaron, and I've got a friend who just wrote a book, about being a doctor and behaving like a CEO. I can't find a dental school, a veterinary school, a medical school that teaches any amount of business, because all 3 of those, industries or occupations, it's not a business, it's a practice.
Yeah.
No, and that's again where the problem begins. Tons of money coming in, but it's not about the money coming in, Aaron. You know that. It's what's going out. So when I do a dental group, my suicide prevention, I can get them 1, 2, or 3 hours of continuing education. Same for doctors, veterinarians, osteopaths, nurses, because they all have to have a certain amount of CE to renew their license.
Yeah.
And it makes me more valuable to the meeting planner because it usually ups the number of people who attend, because you're not just getting the information, you're getting a little something toward, renewing the license.
Yeah. And you're doing it, like, honestly, you even brought up something I didn't even think about. You're getting continuing education credits with a lot of people, and that I've known. Some people love to learn, but other people look at that as like an obligation every year. Like, I got to get my C's in. And then we bring in Frank King, and they laugh through the workshop.
Yep. And then so it's construction, dentists, veterinarians, physicians, attorneys.
Yeah.
3 times more likely to be alcoholics. I can also get attorneys CE for the renewal of their license. And finally, agriculture.
Agriculture.
Yes, because farmers are subject to so many things: finance, weather, tariffs, boycotts. It's generally a solitary business. Corporate farms are slowly but surely taking over and producing products at lower than it, costs the family farmer to produce. They can sell it for less than it costs the family farmer to produce. So yeah, agriculture has a really serious suicide problem.
Wow, I never would have thought. Like construction, like the other ones, like when I think about stress management, I think about overwhelm, and I think about people, and you brought up a good point. Like I've worked with a lot of people who have practices who didn't really understand, they don't have any business acumen, right? There's like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be this, and I'm going to make a bunch of money, but they don't necessarily know what to do with that money, right? So you brought up a really good point there, but I would have never gone towards construction or agriculture. And that's just my own conditioning of what causes stress. You know what I mean? But that's really interesting. Those two verticals, those two industries are big.
And let's see, active duty military has a high rate, but the government, if I was selling cruise missiles, they'd write me a blank check. But I did 4 military bases last year, and I did 3 in Houston in one day because they had to divide my fee in thirds to be able to bring, because at $2,500 in most branches of the military, you don't have to ask anybody. So they figured, well, we'll do Lackland, Hood, and Fort Sam Houston, and each one will write a check for $2,500, and we'll call it good. And then I did Fort Irwin in California, the National Army Training Center, and I did 3 keynotes. So they just charge them one at a time, 25, 25, 2,500. But veterans also, 22 a day, 21, 22 die by suicide every day. But again, there's hardly any money. I mean, they want me to speak, and I've done a couple where they had my fee, but it's and first responders. More first responders die by suicide than die in the line of duty. I've done a couple of sheriffs and firefighters chiefs associations. I did a 4-hour CE for those cats. Man, I bore myself, Aaron, at 90 minutes. It was we need to take a break. I'm getting sleepy up here. So those are generally the people that call or contact me, or.
I got an interesting question. This one hits home personally.
Okay.
And I'm curious on your take on this. One of the things that I'm very open with my journey and my growth in my life and stuff. And I've had issues. I've been sexually abused, sexually assaulted. I've had a lot of stuff. I've attempted suicide years and years ago due to some of those things, right? But more recently, I've also come out of a domestic violence relationship where I didn't realize all the abuse that I had been basically masking with what I felt unconditional love was, and what I felt, just wanting to keep my family together for over a decade. And I'm curious on if you've found, my question's kind of leaning towards, is there more, and I think I know the answer, but is there more suicide in men than in women? And has that been, because you've been doing this for so many years, I'm just curious on, do you find some of those things more prevalent in men than in women? And the reason I kind of bring this up, you might not have any thoughts on this, but I'm now spearheading, a movement on men and domestic abuse, and understanding that men can be abused, right? And we don't really notice it. And one of the things that I was working with a therapist on, like, men usually are like, they don't think I need help. They think, oh, my partner needs help, right? They think that there's mental illness there. But I'm just curious. I know I kind of went in a few different areas there, but I'm curious your thoughts on what I just shared.
A couple things. Because I was speaking this morning to a woman who she's spearheading a nonprofit on spouse legal abuse, where the spouse in question uses the law.
Yep.
She had a client who was arrested for something that he and his current wife cooked up, and she was not guilty. It was obvious, but she spent a couple of days in jail. It was hellish. But in the research I did on suicide and spousal abuse, a spouse, male or female, 3 times more likely to die by suicide than somebody who's in a relationship where there is no abuse.
Wow.
Women attempt suicide 3 times as often as men. Men tend to complete because they use a firearm. And right now in the US, I don't know about worldwide, but in the US, almost 8 out of 10 suicides are men.
Wow.
In part because of losing a job, because men tie their identity to their job. People think that all the manufacturing jobs went overseas. About 15% did, but the other 85% went to AI and robotics.
Mm.
So let's say you're a high school graduate, you go to trade school, you go to work in a manufacturing plant, you become shop steward, you're making good middle class wages. One day, next day, a robot and AI have taken your job, and you're somewhere between 45 and 54, which is the really dangerous demographic. You one day you're a shop steward making good money, the next day, who are you? It's kind of like being an athlete. You've been playing football since Pop Warner. You blow out a knee, and I've got one of my clients, a baseball player, speaks to college athletes and tells them, "Look, you need a plan B." I mean, not that many of you are going to the pros, but when you get out of college, you may go to Europe and play football or something, but you need something else. You need to be planning ahead for that next career, because it can happen in a flash.
Yeah.
So yeah, and men, of course, they call it toxic masculinity now, but when I was a kid growing up in the South, it was called big boys don't cry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big part of the problem. Men don't reach out for help, either mental or physical. I had a couple of friends, one died of prostate cancer, one died of colon cancer, both eminently treatable if you get a PSA test and a colonoscopy, for God's sakes. But men, tough.
Yeah.
Yep. So two women approached me, a psychologist friend and a therapist friend of hers. And the therapist friend teaches suicide prevention to first responders, mostly men. She went to the Barnes and Noble one day, brick and mortar, to buy a book for one of her students on men's mental health. Nothing. She went on Amazon looking specifically for a book on men's mental health. Nothing. So she thought, well, there's a vacuum. So she decided they would write a book. They'd round up 12 guys with 12 issues: substance abuse disorder, divorce, bankruptcy, mental illness, and get them to tell their story. 500 words, life's good. 500 words, life's bad. 500 words, here's how I'm coping. Mm-hmm. Because men tend to take advice from men. So you figure if you put the coping strategies in there and a guy talking about it, then other men would see it and go, oh, I can do that. So they contacted me, Aaron. They said, look, we're gonna make it look like an automobile owner's manual, so guys will pick it up. And we're wondering, could you add the automobile metaphors and could you make it funny? And I said, wait a minute, you two ladies are writing a book on men's mental health. Don't you think you might need a co-author who is, I don't know, a man? So I'm co-author, and we thought we'd be lucky to get 12 guys to come forward. 60 guys came forward with a story.
Wow.
One book turned into 4 books, 12 guys each book. And I've just finished voicing the first one. My deal was make me a co-author, let me voice them for Audible, and I'm all yours. So, yeah. And guys, guys, it's called male reciprocity. If they begin to recover, they're welcome. They want to help other guys recover.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, I'm so thankful that I asked you that question. I never would have thought that this would have gone in this direction. We're at time, a little bit over. I know we could probably go on and on and on, and I think we're going to book you again, honestly. But I love to leave people with a final thought. I'm just curious on what that would be from you. If we could leave them with one final thought from you, what would you share?
Well, let's leave a little good news, Aaron. We've been talking death and dying. The good news is 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. They cannot make up their mind. 9 out of 10 actually give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means you can make a difference. You can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as what we're doing right here. And that is starting a conversation.
Wow. I absolutely love that, Frank. It's been a blessing and an honor to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with the audience. Again, I'm going to have you on again. And I honestly recommend everybody go back and listen to this again. There's a lot of great value here from Frank. And again, as usual, guys, my objective here is just to basically show up and see what comes out. And I think it's been an amazing talk, right? And if you guys want to know more about Frank and you want to understand a little bit more about what he does, you can head over to ovations.com. And thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.
See you guys.